Let's see if that fixed that. Jeez. There we go. Yeah, we decided to skip this part too because, you know, if you're installing, you want to run the installation. So we just go ahead and go to that next step. All right, both ready. So they do, up until now, it's really not much different. We've just been able to omit a couple of steps in ClassicPress. So WordPress has their famous 5-minute installer, and we have our famous 3-minute installer. So we have our call to action to join the community and help build the thing. And WordPress has instead basically more links to documentation. They have the site health thing, which is sort of not something that we've been interested in adopting so far. Let's see. There we go. So let's go make a new post in both of these systems. ClassicPress is finished loading. WordPress is giving us an orientation thing. Yeah, okay, what should I write? Anybody want to throw out a link to like a YouTube video or some other kind of rich media like that in the chat? Let's go with this one. Oh, that's nice. Okay. So we just publish right away and WordPress gives the confirmation step. Yeah, actually, I just found something that sort of unexpectedly ClassicPress does better than WordPress. If you paste in a video to YouTube or something like that in ClassicPress, that sort of just works. But in WordPress, in the editor, you get the raw URL and you only get the full video once you actually go back to the front end of the site and look at it. So I guess we can look at here sort of the official way to do this. Yeah, okay. Well, so both of these work. Both of these are viable options to me. To me, the big difference is what is going on behind the scenes. Like we can probably look at this page's memory usage, I think. Nope, that one, memory. Sure, let's take a snapshot. Well, while we're waiting for that, which is apparently going to take a little while, I guess next I can look at the couple of features that ClassicPress has added. Um, Anything else in particular that you guys would like to see here? That's actually not as big a difference as I thought it would be. 45 megabytes for ClassicPress versus 48 for WordPress. Let's see. So I just changed my screen share to only this window so that we can take a closer look at that. So there are two main things that ClassicPress has added. The first is a security screen. And the idea behind that is to take all of the settings that various plugins and extensions might add that are related to security and put them all in the same place. So that hopefully as our ecosystem grows, that will help give site owners a place to audit all of their security related settings in one place, which is something that WordPress hasn't had traditionally because plugins can put things wherever they want. So you end up with a lot of different and somewhat unrelated screens for these settings to live. Like I said, I think this is something that we'll see more use once we launch our own plugin directory, which is coming up. And we start having more of our own developers in our own community building extensions for ClassicPress instead of up until now, basically people looking at the WordPress extensions that exist and seeing which ones work well. Okay, so the other main thing that we have added so far is this feature to modify the login page, which is a fairly common thing to do on these sites. You might want your business name to appear here and link to the front page of the site instead of the ClassicPress logo.
So with that modified login page, does that allow non kind of admin users to be able to log in and do stuff? I don't have a lot of experience with WordPress, but I did help someone, and it seemed like a lot of the plugins added their own login systems for people.
Yeah. What permissions a user may have on the site is separate from this, which is basically just an easier way to let people brand their sites. I have to save that first.
Okay.
Actually, that's sort of, oh, right, because it's not the same site, of course. Okay. There we go. Yeah, this is really just a way for site owners and businesses to brand their site without requiring an extra plugin. And it actually took us a little while to get this feature right. And because the first way that we tried it had some pitfalls where it wouldn't work on all sites. And we had some community contributions to help get this done, and finally ended up shipping it in our release that came out about a week ago now. So, you know, it's a fairly small thing, but I think this is a good way to add value for our users without requiring an extension, and I think that much more things in that vein will be coming. So we can look at sort of how we made this decision and see our most wanted features list. By far the most wanted things are remove, disable, well, I'll skip a few here, remove, add a choice. And this petition for modifying the login image was somewhere around here. It got around 50 something votes, and we decided, well, this is small, we'll skip the queue while we're working on an approach to allow things to be disabled. Yeah, and really the majority of the work that we've done so far on ClassicPress has been learning how the upgrade system works and switching that over to use ClassicPress servers and APIs instead of WordPress. And next we'll be focusing on sort of doing the same thing, but for plugins. So letting people publish their plugins for ClassicPress and have those appear here in the dashboard under adding new plugins. Oh, and that's another thing that we changed in ClassicPress is by default, WordPress comes with sort of like a demo plugin that people wanted to remove. And it also comes with a commercial anti-spam service that's from WordPress.com. So we went ahead and removed those also. But other than that, there's not too many differences from WordPress 4.9 at this point. So I guess another thing that I could show is
before you move on,
what you would do.
I have a question with regards to
Sure.
the plugins. So, is the only way for people to install add-ons via the plugin browser, how you install it there, or can they grab the source from some place or download a zip file and put it in their code base?
Yeah, you can upload a zip file. You can also just drop the files directly into the site and install that way. I think most ClassicPress users today do a mix of installing things from the WordPress directory here. And,
Yep.
you know, we have some work to do here because this is incompatible, this one is not even necessary. So our next version is going to be focused on that. And our community right now releases zip files.
Yeah, so follow-up question to that is, and that's why I asked the first one, do if the plugins are not related to the introduction of Gutenberg, would they work like WordPress plugins installed on ClassicPress? Or?
Usually, what we've seen is that a lot of plugin developers for WordPress are bumping the minimum WordPress version up to 5.0 or higher. So as soon as that happens, we can't really give any guarantee that it'll work. But for for a lot of plugins, like I'll give an example here. This is a pretty popular development plugin that basically shows you all the queries that are running on the site. And here it says requires ClassicPress version, which is actually a WordPress version, 3.7 or higher. So we'll be cleaning up some of this stuff, like making this display sort of make more sense in the next version. So that one will work fine. There are some that won't, and it's hard for us to know the difference without actually evaluating each individual extension. So I think what we're going to push towards people doing in our ecosystem is actually forking and releasing the plugins that no longer work, because we can take the old version of this stuff. It's all GPL, and so I think that's how that's going to work, and we're going to make the dashboard a bit clearer.
And actually, there was an example. There was an example of that right on the one that you on the page that you were just on of an SEO plugin that one of our community members forked, and now we have Classic SEO. We've done the same thing with WooCommerce and forked that, and we've created Classic Commerce. So our community has started stepping up, and for the plugins that are not compatible, but there's a need for them, we're starting to see some organic growth where people are just taking charge and creating their own for ClassicPress, which is really kind of nice.
Yeah, and it's cool that that is actually happening before we have gotten the core software updated to support that. So here I'm looking at our plugins directory, which is in a very early version. And right now, basically, it just lists things and links to zip files. And eventually that will become integrated with these plugin screens here. And so here is our fork of WooCommerce, which works fine. We're actually using that system on our main site to accept donations. And here's our fork of Rank Math, which we've renamed to Classic SEO. And all of that is open source on GitHub and develops on GitHub. So that's what I've described there really has already started. It's just that you have to follow our forums a little bit in order to stay apprised of the details, because really that's started moving pretty quickly over the past few months.
Have you seen maintainers for the WordPress plugins also maintain a ClassicPress version in parallel, or are there different people working on each project?
Well, my hope is that plugin developers will see that that's not really necessary. I guess there's two broad categories of WordPress plugins today. The first one is plugins that mostly use the old PHP backend and the stuff that the APIs and filters that have existed for 10 plus years. So those should just continue to work. And the second category is plugins that do things related to the block editor, which wouldn't really be a good fit for ClassicPress because we don't have that. But what we're actually seeing so far is that most WordPress plugin developers are adopting a wait and see approach, which is understandable because, we're still small. They don't necessarily know that we're going to be around for a while, or how many users we're going to have, or what impact that might have on their business. So I think we'll see that start to change. Hopefully some of the major WordPress plugins will continue supporting ClassicPress, and I think they can do that from a single code base. I don't that's not a terribly difficult thing to do, depending on what the plugin actually does. And some will probably decide not to support ClassicPress, in which case our community will have to look for alternatives.
How many of the plugins right now would break, and how many are functional, percentage-wise?
Yeah, I would say roughly 95% will work fine. But one of the things that you can look at One of the things that you can look at is this field here that is WordPress version 3.7 or higher. So if that says 4.9 or higher, which is our base version, then it's probably going to work. And like this one will probably work fine because 4.9 is in that range. There are others. I think that's the name of it. Yeah. There are others that say 5.4 or higher, and that's probably going to cause problems, whether because the plugin really is intended to only work with newer versions of WordPress, or sort of through attrition because they're no longer testing against older versions and things break by accident. So basically, in order to support ClassicPress today, plugin developers need to test with WordPress 4.9 or with ClassicPress. Either one of those is fine. And we make a pretty strong commitment to not break things that work on WordPress 4.9, basically.
Something that's definitely been interesting to watch over the last 2 years, because they made the jump 2 years ago to 5.0 and started to push everyone toward Gutenberg. Here we are 2 years later, and 25%, it's about 25% still of all WordPress users are still hanging back on 4.9. There is a substantial or earlier, and then there's a substantial number of people that are on 5.0 or newer. However, they are using the Classic Editor plugin, which is WordPress's kind of hand wave that, okay, if you don't want to use Gutenberg, you can use this Classic Editor plugin for a little bit and get the old quote unquote WordPress back. And they're going to be phasing that plugin out. Well, there are millions of installs of the Classic Editor out there on 5.0 or newer WordPress. So there's still a huge market share out there of people that are dissatisfied with WordPress, the block editor, the Gutenberg, and want, there's the potential for a much larger market share. As a result, a lot of plugins have still had to maintain compatibility with WordPress 4.9 because so many people still 2 years later have not bought into the whole Gutenberg ecosystem.
Is that
I don't know.
Is that the primary dissatisfaction with the new WordPress, or are there other things that you guys are avoiding because people are unhappy with them?
I think, and James, you can speak to this from a developer standpoint. I know for a lot of the complaining that I see revolves around the new block editor Gutenberg and how unintuitive it is and how difficult it is to use and how difficult it is to teach to people that, clients that you're turning sites over to. So I hear that a lot, but I also hear a lot of dissatisfaction in the way WordPress governance kind of doesn't really, they just don't have the clear transparency and governance that other organizations do. And so if it's either Matt's way or the highway, and that is one of the reasons why we at ClassicPress have tried to be so careful about our governance structure and to try and stay away from the whole benevolent dictator type of thing. So to me, those are the two issues that I see. James, I know you wanted to say something too.
Yeah, there are some other things, but the block editor was really the main reason that ClassicPress got started. And there, like, another thing that we can look at is the reviews for the Gutenberg plugin. And well, yeah, you can see right there, this is this data is not perfect, but it is a valid data point. And part of our audience is the people that have left or would have considered leaving a 1-star review on all of this new system. So that's why we said earlier that we see ourselves as offering an alternative for people who want to basically stay with the WordPress framework, as it has been a stable and solid base for many millions of sites for 10+ years now.
I have a general question with regards to stats and the numbers. In Drupal land, at least, there's a general concept, and I think that's for open source in general, that the people that are actively participating in the community, either via contributions with code or just participation or contributing to documentation, is like 2% of the community. So back to those numbers that you were showing about the dissatisfied people, I would expect that with hundreds of millions of sites, there would be more like feedback, bigger numbers there. Is that something that quote unquote WordPress suffers from as a community, like how should I say that? Having a big chunk of the community not actually participating, just using the software.
Yes, absolutely. And you can see that here, and you can sort of think through and put estimates as a thought exercise to very roughly, this number is intended to be an order of magnitude accuracy, not like anywhere close to actual accuracy. Very roughly 100 million WordPress sites. Let's say that 1% of those sites were paying attention to the development during WordPress 5.0, and let's say that another 10% of those users would have come here and left a review. So that would, let's see, that would put you where around, and that's.
Yeah.
Well, the other part of this is that this truly is a fraction, because this particular page that you're looking at is for the Gutenberg plugin, which was the kind of the alpha that was released before WordPress integrated this into core. So this plugin, which by the way is still getting bad reviews, even though Gutenberg is no longer a plugin, it's integrated into core. Yeah, there was just 11 hours ago, there was Gutenberg garbage. So not everyone who is dissatisfied with the evolution of WordPress was necessarily aware that Gutenberg was a plugin prior to that, and this was where they could come to complain about it. This, in fact, is pretty much the only venue where you could come to complain about it, because WordPress really isn't offering the opportunity for feedback. And even here, if you go back and read some of these comments on the ones that there were responses, the responses from the WordPress moderators were kind of like, too bad, so sad. We're moving on now. Either get with the program or goodbye. So it was very contentious split. It was a very big issue, and it still continues to be one.
Yeah, and some people are perfectly happy with this, which is great. We're not trying to invalidate all of the hard work that this team has done over multiple years. It's just not what I personally want out of my website software. And I think, I don't know, that division is kind of a shame, but that's where we are.
Yeah, that whole sort of like attitude of too bad this is happening, whether you like it or not, is one of the things that has upset most of the backdrop community, to make it, to make them leave or stop contributing as much to the Drupal community. That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a little different in Drupal because the direction didn't come from one person in spite of negative responses. It was a little different where nobody really knew at the beginning what the end would look like. And so it was this very incremental, like, oh, well, we're just going to add Symfony. Oh, we're just going to rewrite routing. Oh, we're just going to, and then 5 years later, you have a completely different product. So it's a little bit, I think a lot of the Drupal community, like being the frog in the boiling water, just being like, we'll see what happens. It'll get a little warmer, but it'll be okay. And then when Drupal 8 was released and they looked at it and they were like, oh, I get it. It's different now, which was kind of an interesting voyage to be a part of. But yeah, once it's there, what are you going to do? You know, a lot of the Drupal companies like complained, and then they just got on the boat. And they're like, okay, this is where we are. It's fine. Accept it. So,
Were there some good parts?
Yeah, and we.
Shall I
Sorry,
continue?
go ahead.
Yeah, are there some good parts of the Gutenberg idea that could be adopted and then throw all the complications and problems out?
Yeah, there are. I think at its core, the vision that, you know, you can make a page out of any of these reusable units that they call blocks, and you can put them in the content of the page, or you can put them in the sidebar, or even up top in the header and have them appear on every page. I think that idea is really solid. But the way that they've gone about implementing it so far is, I think, leaves a lot to be desired in terms of both from a governance standpoint, which is like this should be something that the community generally wants and agrees on, and from a technical standpoint, which is they've done it just by adding tons and tons of layers and code rather than actually simplifying the things that are under the hood.
Well, that's what I've always heard about WordPress, is that there's stuff piled on top of stuff on top of stuff on top of stuff, and it's just it's a bunch of spaghetti somehow, and not ever cleaned up properly. Would you say that was the problem, and that you're getting to the point of cleaning up all that spaghetti?
Well, there's limits to what we can do because we do have a large ecosystem that relies on various parts of that. And that's the challenge of backwards compatibility, is that if somebody relies on a piece of code, you really can't delete it, or you can't even modify it too much. But yeah, one place that we were able to start is in the development process. So I've been looking through the Node. So WordPress and ClassicPress are both built using Node and the npm modules and a bunch of tools in that ecosystem. So I started looking through that, and when I started that, there were basically roughly 2,400 npm packages installed to build ClassicPress. Off the top of my head, I don't have that number for WordPress, but I think it is much, much higher due to all of the new JavaScript heavy stuff that's been added. And I was able to work on that for a couple of days and reduce it to around 1,400. So that will continue. We will continue simplifying things where we can, but the first step in that was to say, okay, thus far and no farther, you know.
Is this improving
Similar.
functionality a lot now? Are the speed of operations and so forth are improved by this?
Well, we are at least as good as where WordPress 4.9 was, which is significantly better than what modern WordPress is today. And that will continue to get better as we look at implementing some of these things, like removing emojis. That affects page load time. Personally, I like the emojis feature because I run Linux and my fonts do not have the emoji set. So that's like a JavaScript library that goes in and replaces all that stuff with a platform independent display. But this is clearly something that our community wants to be removed. So basically, instead of removing it, we'll make it possible to disable that on new sites or existing sites that upgrade. Disabling, so as we disable more and more things, yeah, performance will continue to get better. And one day I'd like to do the exercise of like basically mapping out a bunch of different versions of WordPress and ClassicPress with different settings and seeing how the performance of both has evolved over time.
Have you considered those removing or that removal or disabling of features to move them into plugins so that people have the option to install them?
Yeah, that's that's basically that's the plan.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And then
Oops.
another question related to
Typo.
that, sorry. Do you have dependencies, a dependency system? So Drupal and Backdrop inherently, you can have plugins or modules, as we call them, depend on others and build on others. So when you install a certain module that depends on another, you are asked to install that. Is that how things work? Like, is that supported? Is that a thing in WordPress?
In WordPress, it's really not. But as we look into moving core features out into plugins, that will be necessary because
That's actually what I
somebody
was
could come in and install.
asking.
Yeah. And beyond being necessary for that feature, I think that's going to be a big benefit for developers because they don't have to include their own copy of everything. They can just depend on a standardized version of that library plugin.
Okay, yeah.
But there's a, you know, we basically have to build that from scratch. Do you know offhand since what version Drupal has had that?
I've started working with Drupal since the late versions, the late 6 version. So Zen is months older.
Yeah, I would guess probably. I mean, I've been working with Drupal since 4.7. I think 4.7 even had it. I think it's been because Drupal ships with a set of standard modules and then it has all of the contributed code that comes after that. I think it's sort of always had this chaining ability for modules, at least as far as I know.
So even core in Drupal is modules. It's just core modules. So you would have core modules depend on each other, and you would have some system modules that you couldn't disable or they weren't exposed for you to disable, so to say.
Yeah, I could see ClassicPress moving towards a similar system over the next few years. I think this has been tried before also with a couple of other projects that have forked WordPress. So basically the challenge, as I see it, is to remain stable for our existing users and remain as compatible as we can with WordPress.
I was mistaken. I just checked
Well,
the Drupal 4.7 code base and it didn't have info files. So I think the dependency started in Drupal 5.
okay.
So it's been a long
Still a
time.
good number of years ago.
Yeah.
So there's one other thing that I figured we could take a look at, which is the process of switching a WordPress site over to ClassicPress. So basically I'll go through that as a user would see it. Okay, get ClassicPress up here. There's 3 ways to do this. Big call to action button that gets you a zip file here. Let's see, where did that even go? No, that's not fully working. I think it's because I'm sharing the screen anyway. So we'll go in here and add a new plugin. There it is. So this is a small extension for WordPress that basically hijacks the update procedure in order to switch from ClassicPress to WordPress to ClassicPress. Sorry. So this WordPress version is supported. There's a warning about how content edited in the new editor may not be fully compatible because it has a new structure for the data. Even though the posts and pages themselves will carry over fine, all of the content inside of there may not. We probably need to add a note here about
already because we're thinking of doing something like making it easier for people in D7 to sort of like switch. So this is really a good job, like well done, honestly.
Yeah, thanks. And we knew from the beginning that that was important, because many WordPress users who might be looking for an alternative are not technical and would not necessarily want to go into the site via FTP or SFTP or whatever and upgrade all the files themselves. So one of the things that we need to fix here is that this does not switch you over to the latest version of ClassicPress by default. And that's basically making the build server work again and a bunch of other technical gobbledygook. But it works, and as plugin versions start to diverge a little bit more from what's compatible with WordPress versus what's compatible with ClassicPress, it would probably be a good idea to add some more checking about that. But yeah, so now both of the demo sites that I presented today are on ClassicPress. And
cool.
I think that's, yeah. So like I said, not a huge amount of differences from WordPress 4.9, but the biggest one is that we have our own community and we're stable and we're working on growing more. And if there's any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Otherwise, I think I'll stop there.
I have a question about, so now that WordPress has Gutenberg in it, I imagine they're probably still going to be adding new features that aren't related to Gutenberg in the future. Are you going to try and work on those in parallel? Like, will you be able to cherry pick commits, or I don't know, apply patches or something to stay up to date with WordPress? Or are you planning to like significantly diverge and say, no, we're only going to do what our community wants and we're going to ignore what the WordPress community is doing?
So we stay up to date with the WordPress 4.9 branch, which is basically security changes.
Yeah.
We adopt those as soon as a new version comes out. For the other branches, we can take a look here. Basically, our limit on that is developer manpower, and WordPress has this fairly new feature for site health, which is, I don't know, I'm personally not a huge fan of that because it gives a lot of false errors. Like it can tell people your site health is only at 60%, but that might be because of some custom configurations that are there that really are not a problem, and it might be something intentional that the site maintainer originally set up, and then it might have a different owner. So I think that is in a lot of cases more confusing than helpful. But I think that's something that we look at on a case-by-case basis, and actually we have a document that describes sort of what needs to happen in order for those to get done.
It's amazing how similar problems sort of like we have, or similar ideas of how to work things. Yeah. The reason I'm saying that is because we were thinking to add a sort of like health or security or performance section. We were discussing, not thinking. And recently they came up a discussion about something that was an error where it should be a warning or more like an information, and we're warning people about things that are not necessarily wrong with the site, and we were discussing to give them the option to dismiss some of these errors, like acknowledge them and get them out of the equation of whether their site is secure or not. But yeah, I can understand what you're saying.
Yeah, and really that's just one example. WordPress has added a good number of smaller features. So basically, in order to, I'm open to us keeping up with that, but we need people that know basically the internals of WordPress in order to help. So the things that we would look for there are impact to our existing users, backward compatibility, automated tests are always good, and basically understanding of the code and the changes. So
we're on the same boat, or a similar boat, I should say, there, because we've merged a lot of contributed modules. We integrated, I should say, not merged, into core. So we need to keep up with the development of these modules and backport their fixes and their security releases, changes, I should say. But also certain of these modules have been integrated into Drupal 8 core. So as that evolves, we sort of like, and this is more like a considerable amount of more work, because now the D8 core, code has deviated from what we have. But still, we have a small lag, or I should say, I shouldn't say small or big, but we are also dependent on people actually doing the work of backporting those things.
Yeah, we're pretty good about security stuff. We get that out, usually the same day Drupal releases it. But the new features that are getting added to Drupal 8 projects, we don't even have any code that we can use to apply to the version that we have. So there's definitely like well, if somebody wants this feature, we're going to have to write it over sort of mentality. But yeah, so far we haven't had too many of those. So cross our fingers, stays that way.
How long is WordPress
So
going to maintain security and so forth for version 4.9? When are they going to drop it?
well, at this moment, they are still backporting security changes all the way back to 3.7. I know that they're in discussions about slowly dropping those versions, but I would guess that we have a few more years.
Yeah, and because the usage stats for WordPress are in the millions, or in the dozen of millions, I should say, for each of those releases, it makes it harder to sort of like stop. Yeah, it's not good marketing to have like millions of WordPress sites being hacked because of that. So I understand.
No, I mean, at the same time, it's a pretty big burden for the WordPress team to backport those changes all the way back to 3.7. So I don't know, that's something that we're watching. And I think the fact that ClassicPress uses semantic versioning, where you have major version 1, which is going to do such and such things, and major version 2, and our major versions are pretty infrequent. We're still on version 1. Version 2 will come when the new plugin directory is out. We should at least have fewer versions that we need to support over time.
Yeah.
And we're in the same boat. We're in version 1. This week we released 1.17, and currently 2 isn't scheduled to come out until 2025. And part of that is because of the way our backwards compatibility works, is that we've guaranteed not to break any API between any version of Backdrop 1, but because there are still people coming from Drupal, we want to make sure there's a really big overlap between support for Backdrop 1 and support for Drupal 7, so that people can have time to move off of Drupal 7 onto Backdrop before we change any APIs and make them update again. So we've got at least 2 years between when you are no longer allowed to be on your Drupal 7 site and when you're going to have to upgrade your Backdrop site. And so far, it's been 5 years on version 1. We have found so much ability to be able to add things, using the semantic versioning model, that we haven't felt a necessity to break APIs, which has been really great.
There's currently like, how could you bring up the numbers? I can't remember, like 2,500 open issues in the queue. And out of those, like not necessarily problems, even ideas like in feature requests, right? And out of those, maybe a dozen have been pushed to 2.0. Like there's like major sort of like changes that we're thinking, and that's way in the future. But yeah.
Yeah, so you guys have gotten a lot more activity on your GitHub, it seems like.
I am to blame.
Well, we also don't have our feature request list is our GitHub queue. So the fact that you have this other
Okay.
forum where people can request features, we don't have that. It's all just our queue. So we get bug reports and feature requests and even people asking questions in there. So we just use our queue for a lot more things, I think, than you do.
Yeah, what we have liked about the feature queue is that it sorts things for you by the number of votes and has the voting as a first class feature.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We actually have an issue in the not in the main product queue, but in the website. I think the main website queue to implement a feature like that, an up voting and down voting of features that the community wants, and then help us make the decision for its minor release, like what we should be focusing on. So yeah. So if you go and search, like filter by.
He's like, we have a separate issue queue for the backdropcms.org website.
Oh,
I think
is it not the backdrop issues?
No.
Yes.
Yeah. In the issues queue, there's a tag or a label called feature request, which I think is what you were searching for there.
Yeah. So if you go to issues, and then you do, see how it says label?
Yeah.
The filtering? Yeah. So you can filter by that. So yeah.
So how are you prioritizing the things that are in that queue?
That's a question.
Yeah, it's also, I think, determined by the person who has the availability to work on it. So we have this process where you add this label that's like Milestone Candidate saying, I think this is important. And then another person has to come and say, I agree, it's important. So you at least have to have two people who agree. But then you also have to have somebody who's volunteered to advocate for that issue. So that means that every week they have to say like, okay, we're working on this and I'm going to give you a report as to where it's going on. And you don't have to be a developer. You don't have to write any of the code, but you need to be able to poke people to say like, hey, can you update the pull request? Or hey, can you test it? And that's sort of guarantees that we can move things forward. But yeah, we don't really have a great way to look at the list and say which one of these is most important to the community because we don't have voting.
It's partially, I think
Okay.
voting will help, but it also has to do with the vast amount of issues. So it's like in the hundreds just for feature requests, right? And then you go to thousands.
Yeah.
In general, we don't have a lot of questions. Like the questions, if you filter by questions, maybe there's going to be like a dozen of them. Not many. Yeah. And then we see how you're in the github.com/backdrop. Then there's a separate queue for operations, which is backdrop-ops. So this one,
that one is probably private.
Yeah. Oh no, not necessarily. Do we? No, it's not. Not all of it. So the main website
it's a
is
different user.
Yeah. So the reason why there's two repos there, one holds the code and the pull requests, the backdrop one, and the backdrop issues is just, yeah. All right, cool. There you go. See? Yep.
Okay.
We just didn't want people to get confused when they went to Backdrop and find a bunch of stuff that wasn't Backdrop. So the main Backdrop organization just has the code and the issue queue, and that's it. And then all of the peripheral things that we need infrastructure-wise are buried under Backdrop Ops.
Okay. Yeah, that we have most of our stuff under here. We have some under research, which is like, as it says, plugins and projects that usually have to do with one of our feature requests and maybe included sometime when they're ready. But one thing that we see is that we have a lot more people asking for things to be implemented than people who are willing and able in terms of time and skills to actually implement them.
Fair enough. We also, another thing worth noting is that our contributed modules also have a separate sort of like organization. It's backdrop-contrib.
Okay.
And then also the ops sort of like group has a contrib thing that discusses applications for people that want to become contributors. This is basically a repo for all the projects that holds all the projects, right? And this queue now holds all the applications for people that want to contribute or they want to make requests for modules to be ported from Drupal.
So you guys are making a lot of use of GitHub for a couple of things where we have different platforms.
Yes, exactly. And we recently, it's been a couple of years now that we created the forum, and then we have a push for any questions to live there because they need to stay there for posterity. And because we found out that GitHub is more developer orientated, sort of like a platform, not everyone has an account. And if a person wants to ask something, it's like it becomes intimidating, and it might be what you call it, another thing that they need to do, like another account that they need to create. Whereas in the forum, it's more familiar for people to create an account on a forum and start asking questions. Whereas developers prefer GitHub, of course. The forum is forum.bankruptcy.
Yeah, we've seen the same thing.
Yeah.
I'm curious that since both WordPress and Backdrop and a lot of the CMSs are all built with PHP, how much of code